Chris Gibbons, an attorney and father of four, thought he had found his family's forever home, a sprawling, century-old brick mansion in the historic Heritage Hill district of Grand Rapids. The property was a massive renovation project, and Chris set a punishing one-year deadline. This required him to spend months working alone, often laboring deep into the basement, well past midnight. But intensely renovating historic properties carries a unique risk. Aggressive physical disruption, tearing down walls and ripping up floorboards, often acts as a trigger to awaken dormant entities. In his desperate rush to build a safe sanctuary for his children, Chris inadvertently shook the foundations of a property that had been resting quietly in the dark for over 100 years. The anomalies started small. Chris would be working alone and hear a sharp, heavy gasp of air right next to his ear. Upstairs, his wife Kay began waking up to the distinct sensation of phantom hands crawling up her legs in bed. The threat soon targeted the children directly. Their 7-year-old daughter described a man with slicked back hair who would stand perfectly still in the shadows of her bedroom, watching her. For Chris, the haunting struck at his core identity. He had bought this house to protect his household. Now he was powerless to stop an invisible intruder from terrorizing them in their own home. Relying on his legal training, Chris approached the problem procedurally. To find out exactly who he was dealing with, he visited City Hall and pulled the municipal history records for the property. He discovered that before they moved in, the house had only 3 owners. The most recent was a man who lived in the property for 50 years and died inside the home. A local psychic provided a specific diagnosis for the entity. The spirit was territorial, not confused. It viewed the Gibbons as invaders on its personal property. The data pointed to an active turf war, a possessive former owner defending his property against those he saw as intruders. Chris first sought out traditional help for his home, but his local priest refused to bless the house, insisting that spirits simply didn't exist. Left on his own, spiritual healers began isolating the energy to a specific basement workbench, drawing a sharp perimeter around it. They then forcefully pushed that mass off the property, using the perimeter to seal the exterior walls against its return. Chris followed this with physical retaliation. He ripped out the old tools, he threw them to the curb, and openly taunted the hostile entity. For a few weeks, the house was quiet. Chris assumed that matching the ghost's aggression was the only way to win the war for his home. But in this haunting, Chris's anger acted as bait. Projecting medieval emotions and taunting the entity essentially created a frequency that allowed the spirit to feed and find its way back inside. The protective spiritual perimeter failed almost immediately. While out for a jog, Chris spotted a figure with slicked back hair under a street lamp, watching him from the street. The psychological toll was immediate. Chris spiraled into an obsessive cycle of nightly cleansing rituals, while his wife Kay, exhausted by the constant tension, eventually gave up on the entire fight. The ghost didn't need to physically manifest to win. It used Chris's own fear and obsession to slowly erode his marriage and his sanity. The conflict eventually moved into Chris's subconscious. He began having lucid dreams where he was repeatedly assaulted by the ghost in violent, terrifying scenarios. Midway through one dream, Chris found himself beating the figure senseless, only to recognize his own face in that same violence. He realized that by fighting, he was mirroring the ghost's own behavior and providing the very energy it required to remain attached to him. To disarm an enemy that was essentially feeding on his own rage, Chris had to stop fighting. He had to let go of the desire to win. Chris replaced his nightly banishments with a prayer that reframed the entity as a lost soul. He intentionally shifted his mindset from hostility to forgiveness. Once the source of anger was removed, the paranormal activity abruptly and permanently stopped. Years have since passed in silence. The haunting ended not when the house was physically or spiritually sealed, but when Chris stopped providing the entity a reason to fight.